Hey dudes and chicks, and neither of those rules don't apply to you. Welcome to Make It For Last Time. My name is Katie. Today I'm going to be participating in the Eyeshadow Palette Collection tag. This was started by Angelica Lyremar. I'm going to leave her channel linked in the description box below. She is fantastic and beautiful, and her eyes are hauntingly beautiful. So she started this tag, and she actually tagged me on Instagram a while ago, and I've been meaning to do it, but you guys know how much I struggle with fucking tags. Because you have to think so hard that I just fuck it all. Like, I just shit on everything in my mind. I mentally masturbate everything, and then it just gets fucked. So anyway, I decided to participate in it, and after 3 weeks of thinking about what palettes represent these things to me, I'm going to share those sentiments with you. If you guys are interested in seeing the answer to the 8 questions that Angelica Lyremar came up with for this tag, then just hang out. So the first question is if I would pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents me in the color story. You guys know I could not pick one fucking palette for almost any of these just because why do I care? Why is it important to me that you guys know that these palettes are like these things to me? Why do we feel like we need to tell people, like people need to know? Honestly, it's better to understand than to be understood. My first choice was the Nomad Cosmetics Freezy Flamey palette by, it's the Iceland palette, and it's actually called the, Fire and Ice palette. And the reason why I chose it is not because, so this is what the color story looks like. And this color story may or may not be a color story that exactly represents me as a person, but I really like the duality. So the duality is what represents me as a person. The fact that it's the Freezy Flamey palette. It's not just like, oh, happiness. And it's not like, oh, fucking sheer hatred. It's like both of those, like it's the duality. And so I wanted to choose this palette because it's the Freezy and the Flamey, right? And so, and also because of these light blues, and then you've got this purpley pink and this like teal green and then this purple. And these colors are all like right up my alley. And so, yeah, I'm like all the things, and so I had to choose a palette that like represented two sides of everything, right? The other palette that I chose was that represents me as the color story. So there was a lot of palettes that I had that have nuances, right? Like the color story is one thing, but there's like so many things about it. The names of the shadows. And so I also chose the Sorceress palette by Jolie Beauty. This is what it looks like. It's a purple cover, and then this is what the color story looks like. And not only do I feel like the aesthetic and the name, the title of this like represents me as a person, but I also feel like this again. You have your purples, which I love. You have your greens that are not like Kelly greens. They're like different kinds of greens, teals and lime and all this. So you have those, but then you also have these cool shades and these more serious tones. And so like there is like a wild, like childlike and wild person inside of me, but there's also like a sophisticated woman inside of me. And so I felt like the cool tones, the dark side and the colorful side, again, that duality. And also it has pressed glitters. And so for me, like I'm like a child and I fucking love glitter. Glitter is like a candy shop for me. I felt like all the way around the name, everything about this palette, it is me in a palette. I was in jail one time with this chick, this like older native chick. And one day she looked at me and she said, Katie, it's almost like you have 3 distinct separate personalities. And she goes, one of them is like a little girl, and one of them is like a 15-year-old boy, and one of them is like a sophisticated woman who's like highly intelligent. And I fucking thought that felt really on point. And so it's really difficult for me often to choose where I stand on things because I have those distinct and separate like parts of me that are like, they're integrated and they become more integrated the longer I stay in recovery, but they're not like it's hard for me to choose something that represents me as a person because I'm crazy and sane. I'm feminine and masculine. I'm fucking dark and light. I'm happy and sad. I'm like all those things. And so I'm like, I don't know. How do I find a palette that's happy and sad and boyish and girlish and fucking wild and fucking... Moving on. The next question is, what palette represents me in the packaging? I had to choose my Sugar Pill Black Capsule. It is basically a drug. It's a drug in a palette. It's like represents drugs and like molecules in drugs. Like it's, and it's black. It's like all the things, and it's Sugar Pill. Like, I don't know, just everything about this palette screams me in a package. And then also the color story is like pink and purple and like blue and green and yellow. You guys know. And like the shimmers are really pretty good. And it's just all around in a package. This palette is me. Also, I had to include, don't fucking kill me, put that gun away. I had to include the Jeffree Star Blue Blood palette just because it's a casket. And it's baby blue casket. Like, that is me so much in a package. And the color story looks like this. As well, it has clouds and stars, and it's blues and sparklies and like all those things. And to tell you the truth, this was the first blue look that I did with Reckless Abandon. It was like all blue and I just went crazy with it and I wasn't scared and I just fucking did it, and I didn't feel like Mimi. I felt liberated and like a mermaid. I know. Calm down. It's fine. It's just a palette that like it represents me in the packaging. So there. I do what I want. I do what I want. I just don't necessarily know if I want to do that. Anyway, the next question is, if I would pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents spring. I chose two again, and honestly, I feel like a lot of these are interchangeable, but the first one I chose was the Vita palette by Melt, and it's like spring. Just the whole thing about this is like, it's life. Vita means life, and then the color story is reds and yellows and greens, and like this says like growth and greenery and like new life to me. So obviously another thing about this palette for me is that it has a skull on the packaging and all this growth and like plants and new life. You know, we don't really see things how they are. We see them how we are. And so when I think about like what represents spring to me, I like want to like say what represents spring to me, like in all the ways, as many ways as I could hit. That's why it took me so long to like do this video, is because I want all the ways. Then the other one was the Carnival 3 Love Tahiti. Obviously the packaging is all new growth and spring and new life. And then also the color story is all the colors. It's like new growth and like flowers and like, you know, like these are, this is like God's paintbrush right here, right? Like, don't smite me, please. But do you know what I mean? Like, this is like all the colors of spring and all the colors of nature and all the colors of like flowers and fields and valleys and filled with like wildflowers and all that shit. This palette could also be my palette for fun because it's the Carnival palette. It could also be the palette that represents me in a color story because you guys know I wear every fucking color all the fucking time. Like, I have no... And dude, look at this pink and purple section. Like, bam. Like, if I had to pick a pink and purple section, it would be this one for sure. If I would pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents happy. So again, I chose two palettes. Like, I couldn't choose just one. I'm so sorry, you guys. I could not narrow it down because I'm like a multifaceted motherfucker, right? I can't choose just one. So the first one I picked was the Melt Cosmetics Recently Deceased palette. It's the Beetlejuice palette. The inside of it looks like this. It has this like fun little thing, which everybody's already seen. And then also the color story looks like this. For a variety of reasons, but mostly because fun to me is dark. And also, this palette reminds me of my childhood. Beetlejuice was a part of my upbringing, and it's actually like a part of my personality and a part of who I am. When I think of like what it means to be happy, this is like some of the happy memories that I have from when I was a child. And so this had to go in there. And then also the Beauty Bay Book of Magic palette. It is a color story that reminds me of happy because, for one, it's the Book of Magic palette. And so, like, when I think of magic, I think of freedom. And so, for me, the ultimate happiness is freedom. Freedom from active addiction, freedom in my life, time freedom, financial freedom, freedom to, like, be with my daughter and, like, you know, freedom in my mind, that my mind isn't a fucking prison anymore. So like freedom to me is like the ultimate happiness. And then this is the color story. And I feel like this is really like, these are the colors that give my heart joy. There's only one pink-ish in here, but you guys know, like, these are the colors that make me happy. Blues and purples together with like teals and greens. Fucking love it. With the black, I mean, for my black little heart, matches my little soul. One of them anyway. If I would pick an eyeshadow palette that represents the dark or grungy in me, really, that's all of me. Honestly, these were the palettes that I picked originally to represent me. I chose the Melt, the Waiting Room palette. You guys fucking know, this was me in a palette. Like, that's the package. We've got this thing. Love her, my bitch. And then this color story is like, dude, I literally felt like I was home. I felt like I was home when I used this. I literally felt like I had been searching for a place for my soul to go, and it found its home when I put these colors on my eyes. So I chose that to represent the dark grungy me, which it actually doesn't represent the dark grungy me. It represents me. And then I chose the Melt Muerte palette because this is my metal. This is my black metal heart right here. And this color story, fuck. This is the fucking black soul. Like, this is my dark, murky fucking depths right here. Like, this palette is me. It's my dark, grungy me. AKA actually me. If I would pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents the girly in me. So I just want to clarify right now, all of my palettes represent the girly in me. So much so that it took me months to even admit to my friends that I liked makeup. That is how much. Every palette is the girly in me. So like, I don't have a palette that specifically represents the girly in me, because the minute I put an eyeliner on, I was like, is this too girly for me? If I wore a boot with a 2-inch heel, I was like, is this too girly for me? I literally like had to grow. So all of these palettes are the girly in me. My most masculine palettes represent the girly in me. It was easy to narrow it down to one because it's the Venus 3 palette by Lime Crime. This is the cover. Obviously, it's like love. Venus is the goddess of love. And this is the color story. It's like these romantic pinks and browns. It's like the blushy brown tones. It's not like full on pink. There's like these like purpley pink colors, and there's no metallic shimmers in here. They're all like satin shimmers and topper shimmers. And to me, that speaks like to the softer nature in me. So without a doubt, this was like very clearly represented the girly in me, and there was no other palette that even touched it. None of my pink, not the sweet pinks, not the Sakura, like this was the only palette that represented the girly in me, because all of my palettes are girly as fuck to me. Like, it was a crazy transition into my femininity, just wearing makeup and like telling my friends like, fuck you, dude, I'm wearing makeup, you better not fucking make fun of me. Or like, my buddy texted me and he's like, dude, you should come check this out, blah blah blah. And I was like, all right, I'll be there. I'm wearing makeup, don't fucking talk shit. Like, that's how I was about makeup. So it's all the girly in me. If I would pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents fun, this one was actually really hard for me, because my idea of fun, I think, is a little bit different than what my mind's eye tells me other people's idea of fun is. And so the palettes that I chose for what represents fun is the Fairy Frolic palette by Alien Cosmetics. This is the color story, and honestly, just the name Frolic it reminds me of fun, like frolicking in the woods, and like it looks like a woodland fairy. It just reminds me of like, so when I think of fun, I think of like magical, mythical creatures and like escaping into a dream world where everything is perfect. And like I think of books, and I think of dressing up themes, and I think of like pinks and magic and fairy dust, and like I think of magic and fantasy. So that's where I go. So the Fairy Frolic palette very much represents fun to me. And then this Color Story is like, these shimmers are like fucking beautiful. They're literally genies in a bottle. Like they, and honestly, when I put them on, I felt fun. I felt like a frolicking motherfucker, man. And then the other palette that I chose is also an Alien Cosmetics, and it's the Holiday palette. One of the reasons, so the reason why I chose this is because I actually was going to create a new category to put this into, because there's something just so much, so it just resonates with me so hard. And it's because it's this mythical creature, and she's like sexy. Look at how she's like holding her collar like this, and she's like holding her, she just looks sexy, and her lips are like totally Angelina Jolie, and she's like got these, I mean, she's just this creature that like I literally want to be her. And so the Color Story looks like this. And also, once again, you guys know that these blues really draw me in, and they really, when I wear blue eyeshadow, I feel brave. I feel like I'm like doing the thing that nobody else wants to do. And so I went to that Tony Robbins thing, and one of the things that he said during that event was, if you can't do it, then you must. And like, I'm not going to go into what that may or may not mean for you, but for me, it means that everything I'm scared of, I have to do it. I have to do it. Everything that's too hard for me to do, I have to do it. It's not a decision. Like, if it's too hard, I have to do it. And so I don't know, that's how I feel when I wear blue, is that I'm like overcoming some huge fear and like breaking the chains of stigma and like just doing all this crazy shit. But also the fact that this is like, I love this bitch. This is my new best friend. I want to meet this lady. She looks like a lot of fun to me. And I don't know, like, I just love fantasy and magic and that kind of shit. And I love reading, and I love watching movies about fantasy and vampires and fairies and dragons and like all that shit. So like, I don't want to watch no fucking movies about real life. Like, why the fuck would I want to go there? You know what I mean? If I would pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents inspiration, one stole it. Hands down, it's the Made by Mitchell Head in the Clouds palette. I actually originally had this palette as a palette that represents me in the Color Story, but as I went down the list and I thought, like, what palettes do I have that represent inspiration better than this? This is Head in the Clouds. This is where I live. I'm a recovering addict. I have to fight every day to keep my head out of the clouds. And so I live with my head in the clouds. And then also, this Color Story is so chaotic. And yet, like, I found so much inspiration. Like, this is the most inspirational palette I have. This is the #1 palette that when I looked at it, I thought of so many looks, and everybody else was like, it's too chaotic, it's too much, I can't make sense of it. And I was like, bitch, that's where I dwell. That is where I dwell, is in chaos. And when I saw all this chaos, I saw nothing but color stories coming together. So this like took the cake hands down for inspiration, not only in the name, but the cover, everything about it. It's this soft pillowcase, like, it's Head in the Clouds. That's where I live. Like, that's where my inspiration is when I'm dreaming of like magical creatures or like floating around in this future life where everything is great and I've like accomplished all my dreams. And like, I've been hearing a lot lately that daydreamers are the ones that are the most successful. And it's funny because I've spent my whole life coming down on myself for being so much of a daydreamer that I never get things done. But the funny thing about it is like, in spite of myself, I've actually gotten a lot of things done, and I wonder if it's not because I'm so much of a dreamer. I actually created one more category, and this palette represents the badass in me, and it's the Valkyrie palette by XNO Cosmetics. The Color Story looks like this, and I actually had a few, ideas of what I wanted to do. Like, did I want to do that 15-year-old boy that chick talked about? But no, I feel like this is sufficient. There is a badass in me that like thirsts for shit like this and themes like this. So the Valkyrie palette by XNO Cosmetics represents the badass in me. And then I have 3 honorable mentions, and I know exactly what they represent, but I just wanted to talk about the nuances of them. One of them is the Paradise Fallen palette, and it just, that fallen piece like resonates so strongly with me because like I feel like I identify with the Fallen so much that like Paradise Fallen really like sends it home for me, right? And this is what the color story looks like, and you guys know that I'm such a purple person, but then it also has these stone colors and these like deep browns, and like this really does represent Fallen to me. And like the Fallen just I don't know, I am the Fallen, right? I'm also the Risen, but I am the Fallen too. One of the things I wanted to mention with the Jeffree Star palette, the color Prick in the Blood Sugar palette, it has a syringe right there, and that little detail right there won't let me go. It just won't let me go. It just speaks to me on a level that like normies can't understand. And then also the Bloodlust palette, because it's Bloodlust, it like reminds me of vampires, and this kit cover like just reminds me of the vampire Lestat in Queen of the Damned. And so it doesn't represent me in a package. I'm not bougie like this, but it represents something that I hold so dear in my heart, and it's like it looks like something that I'm like in love with, like a dark thing that I'm in love with. And the color story looks like this, which this color story is very much me. It's pink and purple, and most of you guys know and have told me several times that pink and purple are my best colors. So I just had to mention those palettes, and I'm sorry that Jeffree Star is such a fucking asshole, but what can I say? I'm a fucking asshole too. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell because you can't wait to see what happens next. Hit the like button if you guys found it interesting. If you guys were surprised by any of my choices, you weren't fucking surprised. And hang out with me in the comments and let me know what you thought. I fucking love it when you hang out with me in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. You could have been anywhere, but you were here wasting your time with me, and I totally appreciate you. Later. Or why do I have to make everything so fucking complicated?